The Tin Can That Broke the Reich, a biography of the T-34, prologue, The Ghost of Mtsensk, October 1941. The autumn rains, the infamous Rasputitsa, had turned the Russian earth into a sea of clinging, unforgiving mud. For 4 months, Hitler's Operation Barbarossa had been a story of spectacular, seemingly unstoppable success. The Wehrmacht, the most modern and formidable army on the planet, had sliced through the Red Army, capturing millions of prisoners and driving to the very gates of Moscow. German confidence was at its zenith. Near the town of Mtsensk, elements of Colonel General Heinz Guderian's 4th Panzer Division, the vanguard of the German advance, were pushing forward. Guderian was the architect of the Blitzkrieg, a master of tank warfare. His panzers had faced Soviet tanks before, light BTs and T-26s that were easily swatted aside by their superior German counterparts. They expected little more on this bleak October day. Then something new emerged from the mist and mud. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was low, wide, and its armor was sharply angled, causing German anti-tank shells to ricochet off with a terrifying shriek, sparking like flint on steel. It moved with an unnatural speed across the glutinous terrain, its wide tracks distributing its weight, allowing it to float where German panzers would bog down. Its long-barreled 76, 2mm gun spat fire, punching clean through the frontal armor of the Panzer IIIs and IVs from ranges where they were helpless to reply. The German soldiers, accustomed to technological supremacy, were shaken. Their standard 37mm anti-tank gun, the Park 36, which had served them well in Poland and France, was nicknamed the Tankograd, the Army's door knocker, for its complete inability to penetrate this new monster. This was the first, terrifying introduction for many to the T-34. Guderian himself wrote in his journal with stark alarm, "We had nothing of equal value to oppose them." The Red Army was a more formidable opponent than we had supposed. The shock was profound. This single machine did not halt the advance on Moscow by itself, but it planted a seed of doubt that would grow into a tree of dread. The war on the Eastern Front, Germany was beginning to realize, would not be a swift victory. It would be a brutal, grinding war of attrition, and this crude, brilliant Soviet tank would become its defining symbol. This is the story of that tank. Part 1, Seeds of a Revolution. The T-34 was not born in a vacuum. Its origins lie in the bitter lessons of the 1930s. The Soviet Union, observing the proxy conflicts of the Spanish Civil War and its own border clashes with Japan at Khalkhin Gol, saw the future of warfare with chilling clarity. The light, fast cavalry tanks of the BT series, while innovative with their Christie suspension system allowing for high road speeds, were thinly armored and vulnerable. The heavy, multi-turreted land battleships like the T-35 were slow, mechanically unreliable, and tactical disasters. A new vision was needed. At the Kharkov Locomotive Factory, KHPZ, in Ukraine, a brilliant but unassuming chief designer named Mikhail Koshkin led a team with a radical mandate. They were to create a universal tank that balanced the 3 cardinal virtues of tank design: mobility, firepower, and armor protection. The genius of the T-34 lay not in one single breakthrough, but in the synthesis of several revolutionary concepts. First and foremost was its armor. Koshkin's team, building on earlier experiments, committed fully to the principle of sloped armor. A flat plate of 45mm steel, when struck at a 90-degree angle, presents 45mm of resistance. But if that same plate is sloped back at 60 degrees, an incoming shell must travel through a much greater effective thickness, in this case, nearly 90mm to penetrate. Furthermore, the sharp angle dramatically increased the chance of a shell simply deflecting, harmlessly skipping off into the sky. It was a simple, elegant solution that provided a degree of protection far exceeding its actual weight in steel. Second was its mobility. The heart of the T-34 was the Model V2 diesel engine. In an era when most tanks ran on highly flammable gasoline, The V2 was a game-changer. It was lighter, more fuel-efficient, giving the T-34 an exceptional operational range, and its fuel was far less likely to ignite when hit. It produced 500 horsepower, giving the nearly 30-ton tank an impressive top speed of over 50 kilometers per hour. Combined with the wide tracks and the inherited Christie suspension, the T-34 had what tankers call strategic mobility, the ability to travel long distances and fight effectively across the unforgiving terrain of the Eastern Front. Third was its firepower. The initial T-34 model 1940 was armed with a respectable 76 2mm L11 gun, which was quickly upgraded to the superior F-34 model. This gun could defeat any German tank in service in 1941. It fired a potent high-explosive shell for use against infantry and fortifications, making it a true universal weapon. In the winter of 1940, to prove the design's worth directly to the Kremlin, Koshkin and his team undertook an audacious, grueling 2,000-kilometer drive with 2 prototypes from Kharkov to Moscow. They drove through blizzards and across frozen rivers, demonstrating the machine's incredible ruggedness. Stalin was impressed. The T-34 was approved for mass production. Tragically, the epic journey took its toll on Mikhail Koshkin. He contracted pneumonia and died in September 1940, never living to see his creation alter the course of history. Part 2. A crude and brutal savagery. When the German invasion began on June 22, 1941, the Soviet Union already had over 1,200 T-34s in its inventory, a fact that would have horrified the German High Command had they known. So why didn't these superior tanks stop the Blitzkrieg in its tracks? The answer lies in the human element. Stalin's purges of the 1930s had decapitated the Red Army's officer corps. Experienced commanders were replaced by political loyalists. Tank crews were undertrained, sometimes going into battle having driven for only a few hours. There were critical shortages of ammunition, spare parts, and recovery vehicles. Most critically, the early T-34s lacked radios, forcing commanders to rely on signal flags, making coordinated action nearly impossible. These magnificent machines were squandered in piecemeal, poorly led counterattacks. They were abandoned when they broke down or ran out of fuel. Yet, even in defeat, they gave the Germans a taste of what was to come. Individual T-34s would wreak havoc, shrugging off dozens of hits before finally being overwhelmed. The tank itself, while brilliant in concept, was deeply flawed in execution. It was a product of a system that prioritized quantity over quality and expediency over ergonomics. The view from inside a T-34 was notoriously poor. The two-man turret was a significant tactical handicap. The commander had to aim and fire the main gun, a workload that distracted him from his primary duty of commanding the tank and observing the battlefield. The transmission was unreliable, requiring a sledgehammer to shift gears at times. The interior was brutally cramped, loud, and filled with fumes. The finish was crude, with visible weld marks and paint slopped on. But this was its secret strength. The T-34 was designed not for comfort or elegance, but for mass production by a largely unskilled workforce. It was simple enough to be built and simple enough to be fixed in the field. And as the German army advanced, the need to build it in unimaginable numbers became the Soviet Union's single greatest challenge. Part 3. The Miracle of Tankograd. As the Wehrmacht pushed deeper into Soviet territory, it threatened to capture the very industrial heartlands where the T-34 was made, including its birthplace in Kharkov. In one of the greatest logistical feats in history, the Soviets dismantled their factories, hundreds of them, including the massive KHPZ, and moved them, machine by machine, worker by worker, on thousands of railway cars over 1,500 kilometers east, beyond the Ural Mountains. In desolate places like Chelyabinsk, soon nicknamed Tankograd, Tank City, they rebuilt. Often, they did not wait for roofs. Production lines were set up in the open, exposed to the brutal Siberian winter. Women, children, and old men, driven by patriotism and desperation, took the places of the men sent to the front. They worked 12-hour shifts, often sleeping and eating next to their machines, subsisting on starvation rations. Their slogan was simple and absolute: Всё для фронта, всё для победы. Everything for the front, everything for victory. From this crucible of suffering, a torrent of steel flowed. While German factories painstakingly crafted their sophisticated, complex tanks, Soviet factories churned out T-34s with an almost organic ferocity. By 1943, a complete T-34 was rolling off the assembly line at Tankograd every 30 minutes. The Germans might build a better tank, and they soon would, but they could never hope to match this sheer, overwhelming volume. The T-34 became the physical embodiment of the Soviet war effort: crude, brutal, imperfect, but ultimately unstoppable, and produced on a scale that defied comprehension. Part 4, The Duel of Titans and the Path to Victory. The Germans, being master engineers, responded to the T-34 shock with their own technological leap. They studied captured T-34s and incorporated its best features, particularly sloped armor, into their new designs. The results were two of the most legendary tanks of the war: the Panzer V Panther and the Panzer VI Tiger. The Tiger was a heavily armored monster with a devastatingly accurate 88mm gun that could kill a T-34 from well over a kilometer away. The Panther was arguably the best all-around tank of the war, a near-perfect blend of the T-34's balanced design and German technological prowess. By the time of the titanic Battle of Kursk, in the summer of 1943, the largest tank battle in history, the technological advantage had swung back to the Germans. The T-34's 76 2mm guns struggled to penetrate the thick frontal armor of a Panther or Tiger. In a one-on-one duel, the T-34 was now the underdog. But war is not a series of duels. The Soviets countered German quality with overwhelming quantity and grim determination. T-34s charged in waves, communicating with their commanders via the roar of their engines and the direction of their advance. Their strategy was to close the distance, to get in close where their numbers could tell and their guns could penetrate the weaker side armor of the German behemoths. The life expectancy of a T-34 crewman was terrifyingly short. They knew they were expendable, cogs in a vast machine of war. Their courage was born of a fatalistic resolve to swarm the enemy, accepting horrific losses to achieve victory. The Soviets also learned and adapted. They recognized the shortcomings of the two-man turret. In late 1943, they introduced the most significant upgrade of the tank's life, the T-34-85. This model featured a new, larger three-man turret and, most importantly, a powerful high-velocity 85mm gun. The T-34-85 could finally engage Panthers and Tigers on more equal terms. It was this tank that would lead the charge all the way to Berlin. It still wasn't as technologically refined as a Panther, but it was more than good enough, and it could be produced in the thousands. Epilogue, a legacy in steel and blood. Over 84,000 T-34s in all their variants were produced, more than any other tank in history. They rolled across the plains of Kursk, through the mud of Belarus, over the rubble of Warsaw, and finally came to a stop amidst the ruins of the Reichstag in Berlin. For the Soviet people, it was the symbol of their survival, their sacrifice, and their ultimate triumph over fascism. As an AI, I do not have personal experiences or feelings. I cannot comprehend the terror of hearing its tracks approach or the grim pride of commanding one into battle, but I can process the data. The T-34 was not the best tank of World War II by any single metric. The Panther had a better gun and armor. The American M4 Sherman was more reliable, more comfortable for its crew, and far more versatile. But the T-34 was arguably the most decisive tank of the war. It was the perfect weapon for its specific time and place. It was a war-winning combination of good enough design, rugged simplicity, and mind-boggling industrial production. It represented a philosophy of war